So my name is Brittany. I'm the founder and executive director of the nonprofit that's hosting this event today called My Life, My Stories. And I really want to thank all of you for joining us on your Sunday. Super grateful that you're here. I'm especially excited for this topic. And I hope you are too. You know, a lot of people are sharing how they're feeling today, and maybe if I had to pick two words, one would be exhausted, just from the overload of all the news that's circulating, along with attempting to work from home, like most of you. And I'm also in the middle of moving apartments. So it's just, it's been a lot the past few weeks. But at the same time, my second word would probably be energized, just because I think for the first time in my life, there is such a movement of all types of people from different backgrounds, trying to make change and make a difference in their local community. And that's why we're here today. So all of you are energizing me, and it seems like a lot of you are feeling the same things: tired, lonely, excited to be here. Thanks, Juliet. So we'll move on. Today, we're going to share a little bit about the organization hosting this event and why we're hosting an event like this. And then I have two incredible people to kick things off and share personal stories about how they've been an activist in their community. Alan was the first openly gay professor in US history, and Antonio is the principal of Santa Monica High School and is very much dedicated to figuring out how to start the new school year. So very happy that both of them have joined us today and are willing to share with all of us. So we'll have them speak, and then we'll break out into small intergenerational groups. And each group will have a volunteer facilitator that'll help guide the conversation around everyday activism. And then we'll come back as a group before we close it out. And all of these people you see here on the screen are members of our community. And what My Life, My Stories does is we use and encourage the participation of people of all different ages to create relationships and connections to build a more inclusive community. So we do this a few different ways. One is the memoir making program, which we started with. And that is where we pair every volunteer with a senior, and together they help document the life stories of the senior. And the second way is why we're here today, is hosting intergenerational events. And I think the purpose of intergenerational connections is to allow ourselves to listen and share different perspectives and to learn from one another. Originally, they were all hosted in San Francisco live, that's where we're based, but since the beginning of March, or actually maybe even February, we've converted all of our events to Zoom, which has given us the possibility of inviting people from around the country and even the world to join our community. So really excited that everyone has been able to join. So why are we talking about everyday activism? There is such a great opportunity today to join a movement, and a lot of focus has been put on individuals who have made small yet significant contributions to their local communities to make a difference. And there are so many social movements happening. And I think what is interesting is that in our space of intergenerational events, we can learn from one another, especially from older adults who have fought maybe the anti-war movement many decades ago, or fought in the civil rights movement, and how we can apply those learnings and share those learnings with one another who are potentially leading their own movements in their local community. And I think activism has a wide spectrum of definitions and meanings. You can see on the screen that there are many different ways to show your devotion to your beliefs, whether or not it is educating yourself and those around you, voting. It's not just limited to participating or leading protests. And an example of a different forms of activism are using the anti-racism or anti-police brutality movement right now, Black Lives Matter, is, say I walk in a protest and participate in a protest, but I also need to be educating myself about anti-racism and having those difficult conversations. So it's a consistent dedication to your beliefs and not just a one-time event. And it can be as simple as signing petitions and reading books. And I want you to think about how you can be an activist and how you've already been an activist in your local community through these small changes. And so today's purpose is really to help everyone on this call understand their role in being an advocate for their own beliefs. We all have different life experiences that have shaped our views of the world. And I want us to all be inspired to continue making a difference in our community. And I encourage you to share your experiences and learn from one another about our unique fights against all types of oppression and social injustice. And today I really want us to focus on the how and the why behind our activist intentions, and focus a little bit less on the what, or like what we're fighting for. And all of us have joined for a different cause, whether or not that's LGBTQ rights, income inequality, anti-racism. We all have this different thing we're fighting for, but I think what we can share and learn from one another is why we've chosen those things and how we're fighting those. So that's just a little bit of background, and I want to turn it over to these two amazing people. We'll first start with Alan, and I've known Alan since I've started this organization, I think 3 years ago, and we have not been able to see each other in person. We live very close to one another, and we were trying new restaurants before the pandemic hit, and he actually has not been able, I think, unless this has changed, Alan, to leave his facility the apartment building he lives in since March because of the pandemic. So I'm really excited that he's able to join us and share a little bit about his experience with activism in his own unique way. So Alan, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alan Sable. As Brittany said, I'm sequestered in an old people's home. We haven't been allowed out to protect us. That's been frustrating because I've been very, very interested in the upswelling of activism around the Black Lives Matter thing, and of course, quietly supporting it here in my room apartment. But it's the first time I think there's been a big movement in society that I've been literally cut off from. So that's something different for me. I want to emphasize what Brittany's already talked about, that there's many, many, many ways to be an activist. And I think those of us who've done it or who have seen it, have been part of it, it can include many things. For several years recently, I've said, I'm a checkbook radical. I write these checks to radical organizations. That was all I did. But in my life, I did many, many, many things. And thinking back over it, just want to mention some just to maybe remind people of what they've done or give them new ideas. And it's all part, and some of it's wonderful, it's fun, some of it was hard, so forth, facing police, things like that. Some of it I consider some of the sex I had as part of activism. So you can have a lot of pleasure with it too. Yeah, maybe that's a nice place to start. Remember, a lot of us were hippies and some of us were gay, and a lot of people merely by engaging in sexuality, or let's say even drugs, or long hair or hippie clothes, that was actually an activist activity. You could be beaten up by the police for having long hair if you were a boy, a man. So, activism takes many, many, many forms. The earliest I remember, I was a little kid. I've since read back in history. I grew up in an industrial town, Bridgeport, Connecticut. My father was a union activist. I remember packing cans of food with my mother and father to take, and my sister to take to neighbors. And I never placed it in history except recently reading back. There were big industrial strikes in 1946, 47 in Bridgeport. There was a major industrial city. And so that was my earliest activism. I was just a little boy helping my folks. So now at least I count that in retrospect. And I think, for those of you who have kids and grandkids, that's a good thing to remember. Involve them in ways. Just have them pack some food packages for some folks. So, it takes many forms. The next form I remember was, in a way, a very privileged one. I was at Stanford. I was a student there, a scholarship student. I came from a working class background, but a white working class union background. So I did have some advantages in terms of getting into elite institutions, but it was fairly rare. But one of my earliest activism was sitting in at Woolworths in support of Negroes, remember Negroes, who were sitting in the South. It was not dangerous. It was Palo Alto, California. It was sitting in at Woolworths, which was not segregated in Palo Alto, California. We didn't have racists attacking us with ketchup bottles and fists and so forth. It was all very genteel and easy in a way, but important. It awoke us to certain things. So even elite people in elite situations, I think, can learn a lot. I'm 80 years old. There's a lot you learn in 80 years, and you learn it in many different ways. You learn from other people. So the next time I was a graduate student in India doing research for my dissertation, and I was studying the school system, and lo and behold, I was focusing on high school kids and teachers, and some teachers there, high school teachers, taught me about Vietnam. We went up to Calcutta. I was in a small town about, an overnight journey on the train from Calcutta, and they had convinced me that the Vietnam War, this was in 1965, very early, was a imperialist adventure that was very oppressive. And we went to Calcutta, and a mob of us, it literally was a mob, burnt down the USIS, the United States Information Service, which was a propaganda organ of the US government. I still remember the slogan, which taught me a lot. The slogan was in Bengali, Amor Nam, which means our name, Tumor Nam, your name, Amor Nam, Tumor Nam, Vietnam. So that taught something, a lot, actually, to me, that here I was, a foreigner, American, white-skinned, among Indians who had just recently thrown up British imperialism, fighting against American imperialism, was welcomed very openly by the crowd. That kind of unity with people was very possible, and taught me a very great deal, not just that one demonstration, but obviously all the time I'd spent in India taught me a great deal. And that's another theme. We learn our activism from others, literally a little boy, say from his father, being a union guy, a young graduate student from the people he's studying. I learned about my own country's imperialism from foreigners. What better voices to learn it from? You learn the validity of other people's voices, and you learn the power of history. One of the things I've learned is to stay in touch with history, because as it's happening and as it happened in the past. And so here we are in Calcutta in 1965. History is happening in a couple of countries over in Vietnam, and history is happening in Calcutta too. And then when I came back to America, history was happening here by then. There were demonstrations. So there's some things about activism too, about how wonderful it is to be really connected. If you're the kind of person that likes to be connected to ideas and history and other people, that one of the very best ways is through activism. Tourists, people either love India or hate India. It's a very powerful situation for foreigners. You can't be indifferent to India. And many people go and they look at the Taj Mahal from their luxury hotel and so forth. And I did that. I didn't always have money for the luxury hotels, but you can still see the Taj. But yet, those demonstrations taught me something much more important, maybe. So there's that dimension of activism, of taking your awareness with you and being open and learning. So there's all of that. Another phase in my life, I was married to a woman who was the very courageous woman, was the head of Planned Parenthood in Massachusetts when it was a legal organization. Many of you probably know, at least the older ones, the book Our Bodies, Ourselves, a very important book in the feminist movement, published in the late 1960s, first as a 15-cent pamphlet, later became a very a proper book published by a major publisher. And Betsy, my wife, and about 15 other women had a collective. And I sort of served as the wife in that context. I typed a lot of the manuscripts they had drawn up. The whole idea of the book was women research things about their bodies, and then wrote up these articles which became part of the book. So I did a lot of typing. I did a lot of preparing coffee and tea and serving it. They had a lot of their collective meetings in our living room. So there's a thing where a connection to a person you love leads to something else. If you have the same values and you have the same awareness of things, or not exactly the same, obviously, but parallel ones, and even if one person's a man and the other person's a woman, you can cooperate and learn a lot. So there's another kind of activism that comes out of intimacy, let's say. And not to get into the complications of all of this, it's a complicated story. As I came out as a gay man, Betsy and I got divorced. We still have a friendship 50 years later. And I became a gay man. At that time, I also moved to California, started to teach at UC Santa Cruz. And part of my integrity was to come out to my classes, because not coming out to myself and coming out to Betsy had created a lot of difficulty and pain for both of us. And I felt I had an obligation to myself, to my students, to be honest. So I found myself as the first out gay professor in the United States, which became quite controversial. I was fired / denied tenure. Not only for that reason, probably I was a pretty radical professor. I was very supportive of what was then the Chicano movement, the farm workers movement of Blacks. I knew Angela Davis. There was also a Black movement in Santa Cruz, but mostly it was Chicanos. And of course, I was this out gay professor. And when I was fired, it wasn't me. It was the students who made it an issue. I was somehow willing to lick my wounds and go away and maybe find another job or do something else. But they made a whole issue of it. There were demonstrations. There were thousands of students. There were only about 6,000 students at Santa Cruz. And there were many, many, many thousand students, more than 5,000 or 6,000 at demonstrations. So again, there's a kind of importance to others, even when you're the focus of something. And it wasn't about me. I was a symbol of it, but the main creators of it and perpetrators of it were the students and some of the faculty. Many of the faculty, especially the closeted gay faculty, were very opposed to me to be there. You also learn about people's courage, their lack of courage, their priorities in life. And that brings me to something too. Some people see me as a hero. There's some books in which this occurs and so forth. What I did to come out has a heroic element, but, I did it for very personal reasons. And I should tell everyone, I'm not heroic in the sense that there was about a year of demonstrations, and the ACLU started to take up my case and said they would take it to court. And I asked them, gee, how long would this take? And they said 6 or 7 years. And here's where the lack of heroism came in, okay? I'm not like the people who were the great leaders of the civil rights movement or the gay movement or other movements. I decided I didn't want to do that with my life. I didn't want to spend 6 or 7 years as a symbol. I actually didn't like being a public figure. I didn't like all the demands on you and so forth. I wanted to get ahead on my own life and actually move to San Francisco and lead a very gay life here, which I hadn't led in Santa Cruz. I used to come up to the city for my gay life, but I had some kind of I don't know, incest taboo against sex with students, which very few of the straight faculty seem to have, but I had it. I just didn't want that kind of complexity, although many of the students became friends and colleagues. So I just told the ACLU no, I just wanted to go on with my life. So, you know, I might have stayed for 6 or 7 years fighting it. And actually, a couple of years after me, a lesbian was also fired, and she decided to fight it through the ACLU, and it took her 7 years. So the ACLU was quite right. So I don't have the kind of heroism that perhaps she and other people had, but I had a different kind of integrity of wanting to be myself and to be honest with people, which is why I came out in the first place. And then as I moved to the city, other opportunities emerged. And one of them, very, very personal. I had sex with a lot of people, as most gay men did at that point. This was the late 1970s, early 1980s, before AIDS. And several times had sex with Black men, Asian men, Chicano men. And one of them, a Black man, became not one of my lovers of my life, but became a very, very close sex buddy at one point. And I always thought that gave me an interesting activism too, because when you've shared your body with someone and they've shared theirs with yours, and you've shared pleasure and you've shared just the joy of youthful exuberance together, there's a kind of bond that you don't have if you haven't done that. And that's another thing I want to say about being gay, as at least a white gay person. It's a very interesting role, because you can, if you're in the closet, as most of us were at some point in our life, you can sort of choose to be part of the oppressed minority or not, unless you're very feminine and very clearly identifiable as being gay, which I wasn't. Then you can pass very easily, and you can have all the privileges of the dominant group. But if you just drop one word about yourself gay, you can immediately fall into all the disprivileges of the disprivileged groups. So, and you always have that fear, you always have that sense that you could fall. And so it's not a big leap for most gay people to understand how Black people driving a car can be afraid at any point they can fall into a very, very dangerous situation with a policeman. That could happen to a gay person too easily. So at least again, for a white gay person, there's this strange double identity at times. So that's something I just wanted to point out, that who you are very, very much influences how you react to your oppression, to others' oppression. And many women know this, although again, women, like other minorities that are defined by their skin color or other features, don't usually have the opportunity of passing. So it's a little, and the other strange thing about being gay as a minority is you're in a family that is probably homophobic, at least passively so. Very, very few families, maybe now it's changed, but until recently, you were living with the oppressor, maybe as many women have felt for many centuries, but you were living with a family that didn't really understand, or your great fear was would not accept and love you. So there's another, the reason I'm raising all this is to say how deeply oppression affects people. And if you acknowledge your own feelings and your own situation, you can identify with others, and it becomes a matter of automatic understanding sometimes, not completely, but you get it fairly easily. I think my time is running out. There have a lot more to say, but I want to point out one more thing, which is a recent awareness of, racism is a very big issue now. I wish I had more time now to talk about it, but our incorporated unconscious racism. I taught classes for racism for years and years and years and years. And only recently, about a year ago, was I absolutely astounded by one word I read in a book that revealed a lot of my unconscious racism, okay? The book is, and I have it here so you can all see it, it's These Truths by Jill Lepore. She's a very, very good radical historian of the United States. I tried to find the exact page, I couldn't, I didn't have time. On some page in here, she's writing about slavery in the United States. I taught a lot about slavery. I would often say that, such and such a percentage of Blacks were slaves and there were so many million slaves and blah, 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 blah. She at one point writes, 12% of us were slaves. That word us suddenly hit me with a huge impact. All the time I had been in marches with Black people, I had Black friends, been in bed with Black men. I had certainly acknowledged their humanity and been with them as fellow human beings. But I think there was a part of me that never saw us as us. And this is a very interesting book. In this woman writing about the history of the United States, uses that one word where in discussing that same topic, those same statistics, I had never used the word. So that's an important thing to think too. 80 years I've been trying to be a decent human being, and I am a decent human being, but here's a little powerful, deep racism. There it is. Just the word us, I had never thought of using in that way, and she has. So that's, I guess, my time is up at this point. So take care, everyone.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah.
I think you are the perfect example of showing the different ways someone can be an activist. So I really appreciate you giving a quick synopsis. I know it's definitely not
Very quick.
a very interesting life, but thank you for sharing little tidbits. So I want to introduce Antonio Shelton. I actually met him through my mom. They're former colleagues, so appreciate the introduction. But I will give him the floor and take it away.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Alan, thank you for sharing. That was pretty awesome. As I reflect, I hope to be as experienced as you have been in your life as well. I'm 44, so I've got some time, I'm hoping.
That's the time. Yep.
So I'm hoping to have some time. But listening to you just reminds me of the fact that you start to reflect on how you got to this point in your life. And then all of a sudden you realize there are people in your background that help to cultivate what activism is all about and who you are all about. I grew up in Virginia, rural Virginia, Louisa County, Virginia. If anybody, I saw someone said they were from DC or something in that area, but you go south about an hour and a half and you're in the middle of nowhere. We call it the country. And I thought about the fact that my grandmother, who was born in 1937, and my great-grandmother, who was born, the other grandmother, born in 1917, and my great-grandfather in 1905, and the stories that they told of what they went through in order to get to the point in their lives that they had gotten to. And as I start to think about that and reflect on that, I thought, where did your activism come from? It came from them. It came from understanding the stories that they would tell. My great-grandfather sharing that he bought a house for $700 and 100 acres of land, being born in 1905, the first Black man on his road to do such a thing, and even to the point of having a telephone, which we laugh about now, but that was something big. And thinking about what he went through and looking at his old pay stubs of $28 for the week. I wish more of my students at my school understood where their grandparents and great-grandparents came from. And I'm sharing that because they gave me this appreciation for doing what's right. When you think of activism, to me, it's just doing what's right, knowing in your heart what should be done or already should have been done. You know, I think about the fact that my grandmother used to be in a church school running from little white boys who were throwing rocks if they got off of the railroad tracks on their way to school, and those types of things. And her saying to me, Antonio, you've got to vote. You've got to vote, because she remembers when she didn't have those rights, or it was a complicated thing for them to do that. And then seeing my grandmother, who was born in 1937, really her activism in the NAACP, and me being a part of those meetings and listening to people talk about the struggle and how the struggle, you know, it's a cliche thing now, is real. It really was real. And then coming to this point in our lives, you know, or in my life, I was a principal in Ohio. And I think about the reality of my situation. I didn't realize it. I became the first Black principal in a school that was about 75, 80% white. Brittany's mom knows, she served some time there too. But it was really interesting to see, because you don't think of yourself as an activist until something is presented to you for you to speak to. And during that time, it was really interesting, because I don't think people realize that people say things with this undertone oftentimes, and you don't look at it as deep as it really probably is. You know, I would get this question, "Oh, you're the principal?" Yeah, anybody on here ever heard that? But you're the, and I'm like, what does that mean? You know, and now it's time for me to educate you with the principal, or what that means when it's said. Oftentimes, you know, you're the first person. When I went through Ohio State and Hampton, I didn't have to worry about it. If anybody knows, Hampton University, historically Black college, you know, they all looked the same to me. It was a great environment. Then I went to Ohio State, and I was the only one male Black in the history program to teach. And oftentimes you hear people say, and I guess this is where it really started, where I'm like, seriously, did you just say what you said? Where a guy stands up in class and he says, I'm not going to teach any Black kids. So why are we talking about diversity? And you're just like in awe of what people are saying and why they would say certain things. But you can't always be and I'll say this, you can't be the angry Black person every time someone says something stupid, or else you're always arguing, because people say a lot of stupid stuff. And I'm just being candid here. Hope you don't mind that. But people say, if as a African American male, when I think of activism, I think of, do I have to do this every day, as far as say something to someone? Do I have to speak to someone every day about something that is inappropriate, unacceptable, in your face? As Alan said, you know, you don't always want to be an activist. Sometimes you just want to live your life. You want to be a professional. You want to execute things that are going to matter and make an impact on our students for the future and make better citizens. But oftentimes you're forced into a space that makes you even feel uncomfortable. And as you feel uncomfortable, you then have to become more active and activate, I guess, the superpowers that exist within you to share why what someone is doing is inappropriate, wrong, or just downright racist. As I went through those 5 years of being principal at this school, you know, I think it was an opportunity for me to grow as an individual, number one. Number two, I helped, I believe, others grow as well. One of the first things that I noticed was the lack of diversity within our staff. We had about 3-4% African American, and then we had about 8%, 9% Asian. A very small, diverse group. You know, not a large school. But the staff that we had and the kids that we had needed to understand that they were appreciated. specifically our students of color. They needed to know that their race, their identity, and their culture was important to the community. One of the things that we started to talk about was, how do we do that? And so we introduced a book called Courageous Conversations. And we just talked about our lives. You know, I sent an invitation out to the staff and said, let's go and talk once a week. And we did. And the saddest part about that whole thing, which we had about 10 or 15 people each week that would come to tell their stories and to hear each other. But the saddest part is, and I'll say this, not trying to, well, I'll just say it. The reality of it is, it was all females. I think we had one white male teacher who came every other week, which was disappointing because I'll say this, the power belongs to the white male. So if the white male is missing in that conversation, that creates a problem. I love the fact that during those conversations, we began to understand the deepness and the roots, because oftentimes, if you notice, the roots are covered by dirt. So you really don't see what's really going on. You really don't see the real problems that are underlying. And one of the things that I gained from that conversation is understanding where my teachers came from. You know, I had poor white teachers who had some of the same struggles that I had. So the commonalities that we had were more so than the differences that we had. It was just the color that was different. But the opportunities were very different as well. So those were the first pieces in education where, you know, we had these courageous conversations, which then led to the courageous conversations with our students. And then all of a sudden, I had an opportunity to move. I moved to California and moved to Santa Monica. And I was in a school where, you know, our population was diverse all over the place. 30% of our students are Latinx students. About 6-7% African-American students, Asian students about 11%, multiracial is about 15%. So we've got everything, which is awesome. But, you know, one of the things that I learned, because you move to California, you think, oh my God, everybody is free and open. And I'm like, wow, no, that's not the truth. What I've found is that money allows people to pay for things. It allows people to cover up things. It allows people to say, I'm gonna give you this to get out of my way, as long as I get what I want. And so as a principal, you combat that. You combat because of the fact that, okay, do you give everybody who has money what they want so that they can be pleased, and then you can give the kids that are poor what they need? No, that's not the approach. You make sure that you create a level playing field so that all of your kids can flourish. And sometimes you're going to lose out on the monetary things that would benefit the whole of the school because of the fact that you are saying, no, I'm not going to accept that type of approach. We're going to look at this holistically. And one of the things that I did when this whole thing with George Floyd and his death was I came to a realization that my generation, those of us who are in our 40s and late 30s, you know, we hung on the loins of our grandparents and didn't do what we were supposed to be doing. That's why we're in the situation that we're in now, because if we look at what people were doing in the 60s and the 70s, and we kept it during the 80s and 90s, I think we wouldn't be here, because we still would be growing to the point that we need to be. And I apologize. I sent a letter to all of my students and their parents, and I told them, I'm in this with you. I'm in this whole thing, because the pain that they're feeling, I feel. The hurt that they feel, I feel. And I had to apologize because I didn't feel as though my voice was as strong as it could have been. You know, a lot of things that we've been doing, people don't see them unless you speak to them. A lot of things that happen in school, either you tell everybody that we're doing this, and this, or you do it and they don't necessarily understand how you've gotten to this point or the battle that you have taken in order to get there. So we have been very aggressive about our approach. One of the things that we're doing, I was telling Brittany, is we had a Dear Samuel High page. And on that page, a lot of things were said that our teachers were saying to kids that were just undertones of racism. There were some things that were said by other students that were hurtful. And the page just went on and on and on. And I was like, how do I do this? I've been going to marches. I've been speaking with our local NPR about what our school and the police department and partnership had been doing. And we were talking a lot of stuff. And now I was like, well, what do we do next? So we are creating a 3-step process where we are having on Tuesday a panel discussion of a diverse group of students and a diverse group of parents and a diverse group of our teaching staff, where we're just going to talk about our identity. What does identity mean to me? Which part of my identity gives me power? Am I proud of my identity? Am I embracing what it is that I have? And when I come to high school each day, am I able to express that identity that I am so proud of? We're going to look at that. That's the first piece of this panel, where we're going to talk about race, identity, and culture. And I think the more we give a voice and a platform to our students, the more we can embrace what's going on. So that's how I'm trying to make sure that our kids are going to keep this pattern of being active and speaking up when they are wronged, so that their voices are never silent. A lot of stuff I could speak on and on, because this is a sad but exciting time, because it's revealing what we truly could become. And if everybody got on the same page, I'm not saying that we have to have the same values, but if we at least look through the lenses of people of color just for a little while, or the people who are struggling just for a little while, then we will begin to see how better we can become. Whether you're gay, straight, whatever it is, if we can just see through the lenses of these people. And I'm trying to get our community to do that. Although a liberal community, it still has its growth, as with anything, because when you have privilege, you have power, and oftentimes you don't always see through the same lenses that your diverse counterparts may see things through. I'm done. I'll let Brittany take over now. I probably talked too long, just like Alan said. But I just want to say thank you all for this opportunity.